Today I'm going to be doing an overview of Chapter 5, Andrew Carnegie, and it's going to be on the Master Money Man, A Fortune in Paper. And this chapter really focused a lot about Carnegie making changes to his life and also venturing into different industries, which he, of course, found success in. So the first question that came to mind for me was, where did Carnegie move to from Pittsburgh in 1867? This, of course, was New York City. He wanted to change the scenery and to really expand his brain through education and higher cultural endeavors that would really just kind of change the way he was thinking a little bit and give him a change of scenery that he felt that he needed at the time. So when he moved to New York City in 1867, he started hanging out in a lot of salons with like people that were influential, people that were very highly educated, and he really just talked to them and learned a lot about the world around him, and really was experiencing a lot of the education he didn't get to get from working so much as a young boy. So the next question centers around what a lot of the bulk of this chapter was about, and that was the telegraph companies. So my question is, what did Carnegie notice about the telegraph companies that he saw potential in? Now, this was that telegraph companies were going to need their own right-of-way across the country to, be able to build their lines and to be able to have that connection and make the telegraphs be able to extend across the country and work in the proper way. So he realized that his telegraph companies are going to need railroad access. He understood that they were going to need this railroad access and that either way these companies were going to have to pay for it and work with railroad companies in order to make everything work smoothly. So basically he understood this, and that he ended up teaming up with James L. Shaw, who owned Atlantic and Pacific Telegraph Company. And then basically Carnegie traded him stocks that were equal, but Carnegie and his partners ended up trading them not even actual cash and just stocks that were written down to represent the value of the money. So they ended up making $3,000+ every year when they basically didn't even have to pay for this partnership with James L. Shaw and Atlantic and Pacific Telegraph Company. So the Western Union was another company that was big in the telegraph industry, and then they started to get some competition. So it was hurting the dividends that Carnegie and his partners were getting from Pacific and Atlantic. And then basically, once that started to happen, Carnegie jumped ship. Now, this wasn't a very ethical move on his part, but being the businessman that he was, it was something that he had to do in order to propel himself into more success and to keep away from the losses that the Union Pacific was going to experience from the moves and the bad investments that were made. So one of the other questions I included here was what was going on in the United States at the time that delayed the construction of the Transcontinental Union Pacific, and what eventually allowed the construction to take place. So basically, what delayed the building of the Transcontinental Union Pacific was that the Civil War actually extended on for some time that people did not think was going to happen. So that was kind of a roadblock for them in being able to construct that. But another company ended up coming along, and then they were able to support some of the money to be able to get that constructed, even though the Civil War was still going on. So this gets to more some of the shady moves that Andrew Carnegie was making. This question says, what did Carnegie tell the finance chairman of the St. Louis Bridge Company he needed to borrow $200,000 for? So basically, Carnegie, he was making kind of some sneaky moves, and then basically he told the financial chairman of the St. Louis Bridge Company he needed this money to fund the Keokuk Bridge, and that he needed money to fund that. But really, Carnegie had other plans, and right when he was able to borrow this money from St. Louis at a 7% rate, he immediately found an investor in Pittsburgh to invest an equal $200,000 into Andrew Carnegie's company at around 8 or 9%, so that he was able to manipulate the stocks and get money that way. So it was a good move. He made money there, but it was also kind of shady. So what happened to Carnegie and Union Pacific after the company began its downfall? So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Carnegie, he kind of knew that he manipulated some of the stocks and some of the agreement that he originally had with Union Pacific and the railroad company. So after word got out about how the company and stocks were going to crash, Carnegie distanced himself from all that, and they began to all sell the cheap stocks, which they had about $3 million or so in. And then after that, basically everyone kind of looked down. They kind of looked down upon Carnegie within Union Pacific, and they also removed him from the board because of this. And they kind of just started to view him as someone who played them and kind of just used them for financial gain, which honestly wasn't that far from the truth. And then lastly, a question about the chapter is, how did Carnegie broaden his cultural horizons when he moved to New York City? So a lot of it, Carnegie spent a lot of his early life and so working, being a lot of Midwestern towns, kind of like Pittsburgh, kind of stuff like that. But when he went out to New York, he was really set on just learning more kind of about culture through education, art, and he really just wanted to surround himself with people that were highly educated and affluent. And he even has here that he would go to the salon of Anne Lynch Boda in New York, and in her youth they had attracted Edgar Allan Poe, who actually recited some poems at some of the salons that would be where Carnegie was in New York. So overall, this really just kind of gave him more of a perspective on the culture at the time in the United States, and kind of, just like I said, changed the scenery around. So overall, it was a good chapter. You learned a lot about how cunning Carnegie was, in my opinion, because you saw a lot of the shrewd business moves he would make and the way he was able to manipulate stocks and money, and also showed kind of how he grew from beginning to end, for when he first started to kind of get deep into these business ventures to at the end, how he kind of decides to stop going in kind of on these schemes, or on this question here, he kind of stopped going into these speculative projects, because by 1872 he knew that he wanted his own company, and he wanted it to be with material goods, like structured. He wanted to do industry and make materials that could be used and could be tangible, and that was the beginning of Carnegie Steel, which we know he had many successes, but Carnegie Steel kind of was like his main thing and his biggest business venture. So it was cool to see kind of how that started from beginning to end, and at the end of chapter 5, it's kind of the beginning of him getting Carnegie Steel together. So thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation on chapter 5 of Andrew Carnegie.